So let's get right into it. Are the world's billionaires our greatest saviors, or are they a fundamental threat to our way of life? It's a huge question, and it really gets to the core of how our modern world actually works.
We hear two totally different stories about the role of billionaires, right? On one hand, you've got this picture of them as these heroic problem solvers using their incredible wealth for the public good. But then, on the other hand, there's this warning that this exact same concentration of wealth is actually eating away at the very foundations of democracy.
So how can both of those things be true at the same time? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig into that. We're going to look at the data and the arguments behind both of these powerful narratives. And we're drawing from two really interesting recent reports that frame this debate perfectly.
And, out in the real world, the debate is often framed in these really direct terms. This sign pretty much captures the essence of one side of the argument. But to really get the full picture, let's start by looking at the narrative this is pushing against.
All right, so let's start with this first narrative, the billionaire giver. This view, and it's backed up by data from a recent Forbes list, really paints the ultra-wealthy as our greatest benefactors, doing philanthropy on a scale we've just never seen before.
And the whole core of this argument really comes down to the sheer scale of the giving. We're not just talking about charity here. This is about a strategic, calculated deployment of billions upon billions of dollars, all aimed at tackling some of the world's toughest problems. Things like disease and poverty.
Okay, now take a look at these numbers. What's so interesting here isn't just the lifetime giving totals, which are, they're astronomical, right? It's that percentage of net worth column. Look at Mackenzie Scott. She's already given away almost half of her entire fortune. That really speaks to a pretty deep level of commitment.
Let's try to wrap our heads around that number for a second. $68.3 billion. Warren Buffett's donations alone, that's just a monumental force in global health and the fight against poverty. To put it another way, that's more than the entire GDP of a lot of countries.
And this 46% from Mackenzie Scott, wow. It really highlights a totally different but just as impactful strategy. She's gone with this model of rapid, widespread giving, distributing billions to thousands of smaller organizations, a lot of them often overlooked, focusing on things like education and economic equity.
And if you look at where all this money is going, the targets are incredibly ambitious. We're talking about global health, poverty, education, climate change, human rights, even pioneering things like AI-powered biology to cure diseases. These donations are aimed squarely at humanity's biggest, toughest problems.
So that paints a pretty compelling picture, right? Billionaires as society's champions. But this brings us to a completely different take, a perspective that asks a really tough question. What is the political cost of all this extreme wealth? It questions the very system that allows for this kind of wealth to exist in the first place.
Okay, so now let's look at the other side, the billionaire ruler. This comes from a recent Oxfam report, and its title says it all, really. Resisting the Rule of the Rich. It basically presents the complete opposite of that philanthropist narrative. It argues that extreme wealth, no matter how it's spent, is a direct threat to democracy.
The report points to this really disturbing trend. Look at this graph. It shows that as billionaire fortunes have absolutely skyrocketed since 2015, the number of people facing hunger around the world has also climbed. Those two lines are going in completely opposite directions. And that suggests a system that's working really well for a few people, but maybe at the expense of many.
And it's not just that their wealth is growing, it's that the pace is accelerating. So in 2025, billionaire wealth grew by 16.2%. According to the report, that's 3 times faster than the average rate over the 5 years before that. 3 times!
And here's the crucial point the report makes. This isn't just about money. It's about power. The argument is that when you have this level of extreme economic power, it just inevitably turns into extreme political power. And that, in turn, is what hollows out democratic institutions. So what do they mean by democratic erosion? What does that actually look like? Well, it's not like one big event. It's a slow process. It means weakening checks and balances, like the courts. It means chipping away at civil liberties, the right to protest. And it means manipulating elections so they favor the powerful. The report basically visualizes this as a 3-pronged attack on the foundations of a free society. The argument is that this immense wealth gets used, or weaponized, to undermine those checks and balances, restrict our freedoms, and ultimately control who wins elections.
Okay, so now let's put these two very different viewpoints right next to each other so we can really see the conflict at the heart of this whole debate. And here it is. This is the central tension. One side says billionaires are dedicating their fortunes to solving our biggest problems. The other side, and this is wild, the Oxfam report even cites a survey where over half of millionaires believe this kind of extreme wealth is a threat to democracy. So that's the real question, right? Are they solving problems, or does their very existence create an even bigger one?
Get a load of this statistic from the Oxfam report. It estimates that billionaires are 4,000 times more likely to hold political office than an ordinary person. 4,000! I mean, that just suggests that this level of wealth gives you a kind of political access that creates a whole separate and way more powerful political class.
So wrapping up that first perspective, the conclusion is pretty hopeful. It's this idea that billionaires are becoming these key partners in global progress, using their incredible resources to solve our biggest challenges.
But the other side presents a much starker choice. It's not a partnership, it's a choice. And they use this quote from U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis to make their point. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. A pretty powerful statement.
So where does that leave us? We've just walked through two powerful, data-backed, and totally conflicting realities. On one side, immense generosity. On the other, the risk of systemic political capture.
And maybe the most crucial takeaway here is that both of these things could be happening at the exact same time. It's a paradox. Think about it. A billionaire can fund life-saving medical research, which is amazing, but at the same time, their immense wealth could also be giving them way too much influence over the political process that shapes healthcare policy for all of us.
And all of this really leaves us with a fundamental, maybe even uncomfortable question about power, money, and, well, the future of our societies. When private fortunes get big enough to solve public problems we usually expect governments to solve, who should get to decide how that money is spent? Who sets the agenda? Who decides which problems get solved and how they get solved? That's the billionaire paradox we're all left to grapple with.